People who partake in the hobby of faffing about with old electronic computer shit seem to often embark on the never-ending pursuit of possessing the most exotic and highest performing hardware, always chasing those better benchmarking figures, and well, I think that's kind of needless, and so today we've got a pretty plain, for the most part, Cyrix 686 machine to look at. Hello everyone, I'm High Treason. It's been a little while, hasn't it? Oh geez, is that a long story? I'll tell you about it at the end, or partly, because I don't think there's enough time on this entire platform to tell you the whole story. Maybe I should write it down somewhere and link to it in a future video, I don't know. But as I said, we're going to look at a Cyrix 686. It's not a particularly spectacular machine, but that's why I like it. It's the machine you bought in the department store. It's the machine that doesn't do things that are flashy, and it didn't have the latest hardware, and it's exactly what I want out of it. So I suppose we'll have a look at it, and to be honest, I really just need something that's really routine and easy to get back into this, because the new setup is quite different to the old one and I'm sort of rusty. So hopefully this works out fine. We're about 5 minutes to midnight on the 30th, and I want to get this done before New Year, so I've got my work cut out for me on this one, so we'd better just get on with it. As usual then, we'll start with the chassis. What a gloriously yucky thing this is, carrying the Colossus branding. It's just so obviously a Granville machine, the same company who owns Time Computers, and I think Tiny for a time, among others. Certainly you can tell this came from the same place, and indeed it features very much the same sort of hardware. The front panel carries the label for a Pentium OMX, because that's what mine came with. They almost certainly came with other CPUs too. I've long suspected it was whichever CPU Granville just so happened to have on the shelf in that particular week. Now you might think I'm bashing the thing before we even start, but out of all the OEMs I always had a lot more patience for Time and their cousins, because they used standard parts and were usually fairly inexpensive and weren't really bad to work on. That said, beyond the missing blank plate I can't be bothered to find a replacement for, there's nothing special at the front. A 24-speed LG CD-ROM drive that doesn't work, a floppy drive that probably also doesn't work because it's a floppy drive, and the heavier, pushier variant of the power button. This chassis came with different bezels and could take both styles of switch. But I don't make videos about switches, and the turbo's always on this thing anyway. Still, you could install an AT power supply in this chassis if you wanted to. This one's ATX. Well, ain't that just pretty? Wherever this thing lived, it obviously got the sun, because you can see where the yellowing is less pronounced wherever it was in shadow. What I'm saying is the computer has a suntan. Weirdly enough, I also go yellow if I spend time in the sun, rather than turning brown or burning. I never understood why, but I look like I've got jaundice, so I tend to avoid it. Around the back we can see that it's the older ATX form factor, that wide-bodied style, where the power supply covers the CPU. The power supply itself is the appropriate type, rather than the fan being at the back, as with baby AT power supplies and newer ATX power supplies to a point before they went back to doing it this way. The early ATX supplies had their fan inside, oriented over the CPU, to draw air away from it. We'll see more on that later on. The motherboard uses a slightly later layout. The earliest ATX boards weren't quite as tall, with all the ports in a single row on the backplane, lacking USB, sound or a game port. You won't miss that this machine is still old enough to lack the colour code, and it has onboard VGA. Oh, I'm sure that's going to perform just fantastically, but frankly it could be video molasses, and I still wouldn't really care. At least the onboard audio has line in. Good luck getting a PC where that does anything today. Yeah, we've got to claim low noise somehow, and we haven't really made any new sound chips since 1997, aside from doing slight alterations to call it HD audio, which was probably just remapping existing channels. We can't do line in now. Just wonderful. How much technological advancement we have made. The VMT sticker confirms if there was ever any doubt that this is a Granville system. This was the name of their manufacturing arm, as far as I know, but I don't know what it stands for. Vaginal menstrual tampon, maybe. Your guess is as good as mine. For expansion cards, well, there's an Ethernet adapter. Guess what? It doesn't work. And a modem that came with the computer. I do use the modems, you know. Not very often, but I do have a use for them. At least it's a voice modem, so it's not just a plain old piece of crap. You can listen to the farts as well, thanks to the audio output. Well, that was all pretty fucking impressive, wasn't it? Gee, wow. High-end system, this one. It's not supposed to be. You know, I actually quite like these cases that Granville used because they're pretty solid and they're mostly easy to work on. Yeah, they're on the cheap side and you can tell, but for all the bashing the company got, I can't remember them ever really using any bad cases. They're all decent enough. To get into these ones, you have to take out 6 screws. There are other screws that go through holes in the back panel, which hold in the motherboard tray. You probably shouldn't remove those unless you want to take the motherboard out, but if you do it by accident without thinking, nothing bad will happen. The tray's not just going to fall out. You do have to slide it back a fair bit. The case covers are slide back and lift type. It's pretty cumbersome but workable. Not particularly thick steel, but probably better than anything you get today. I should remove the power supply because it's in the way, but you can see how it covers over the processor, or it would if my CPU was in the position dictated in the early ATX specification. Oh, damn it. This is what happens when you let other people around your stuff, they spill coffee in it. Thankfully nothing got damaged. It's not a very big power supply, is it? It doesn't need to be, because let's face it, this is really just a socket 7 machine, like your regular little baby AT desktop, just with the bulky ATX form factor instead. But still, you can see how the fan would draw air away from the processor, and Intel, when they wrote up the original spec, intended for passive CPU cooling. This is perhaps why many Pentium Pro CPUs seem to come with passive heat sinks, as they would have coincided with the birth of this form factor. Oh, I'm sure you're sat there thinking it's a really dumb idea, but when you consider how many cases today stick the power supply at the bottom for some reason and just have the fan suck carpet, it doesn't seem bad. At least the idea of cooling a CPU by making an existing fan bigger and using that suggests the designer probably knew their way around a PC of the time and was merely a bit short-sighted as to just how much power they'd start to dissipate as the decade wore on. These days you can tell everything was designed by some retarded little prick who's only ever used NiSlab and whose breath smells like soy sauce and dicks. I have SD-RAM in here. Somehow I envision this PC might have come with EDO-RAM. It won't really make any difference on here, much like how you can install EDO in place of FPM on some 486 boards. Yeah, you can use the newer RAM technology technically, but you're really utilising it in much the same way as the older type, and probably gaining nothing. In some cases it might even be slightly slower. Still, it's nice to have options. I don't know if you can use both at once in here, but I'd guess not, because you usually can't. And as you can stuff 128 megs of SD-RAM in on a single stick, it probably isn't worth worrying about. Some early SD-RAM boards can't do this. This one can. This could actually be good if we were interested in performance, because we'd stick really late SD-RAM in that's capable of high speeds and just set all the timings to basically 0, and the thing would more than likely never even complain. Of course, we won't be doing any of that here today, and everything's going to be left pretty much on defaults, which on ECS boards tend to be slow, not quite to the extent of Chaintech, but both of those board vendors seemed to really be intent on having their thing actually work by default. 512K of external cache is included on the board. I suspect it's pipeline burst solely because of the numbers that will come out when we test it in a moment. You can't upgrade it, but given the maximum memory of the board is probably 192 meg, maybe 256 at a push, and who the hell was going to use that on this thing back then, it doesn't really matter, because there should be enough cache to keep the maximum feasible amount of RAM within the cacheable range. The motherboard in question is an ECS board, as you might have heard me mention, and are you really surprised? I mean, this is my thing, isn't it? my machine, so of course it's an ECS board, and of course it has white connectors and slots. Once again, wasn't intentional. It wasn't something I sought out. It's just the board that came in the system when I got it years ago, and this would be what it had from the factory. I seem to think there was a baby AT version of this board, probably P5STB if I know ECS naming scheme as well as I think I do. No guarantees there though, maybe I'm getting confused with the P5SD. It has a sys chipset, the 5598, codenamed Jedi, ever common on low-cost PCs at the time, and a slight change in direction from their earlier models. Fairly consistent with then-contemporary chipsets, and on paper there's certainly nothing wrong with it. Some people would discount this one for being anything other than an Intel 430 of some type, but I don't. The video chip lives inside it, with nearly everything else, showing just how far integration has come since those big 80s and early 90s machines that we normally play around with on this channel. Keep in mind my Pentium 66 with the older Sys 5000 chipset requires 3 separate QFP chips and doesn't include any video or anything on them. In fact, to all intents and purposes, they were just an incremental step up from the singular IPC of the 286 days. There's no dedicated RAM for that onboard VGA. It shares anywhere from 512K to 4 megs of the system memory. It's user selectable, and by sharing that is to say it reserves that much memory for itself and doesn't share it with anything. In later PCs this would seem absolutely horrible, but as most VGA cards of this era were using EDO RAM anyway, this really doesn't seem so bad. Quite honestly, I would imagine the memory interface on this motherboard could outrun any VGA chip of this era quite happily. Sound is also on board, but that's on its own discrete chip, an ESS ES1869, also ever common on cheap computers of this era, and interface the ISA bus. These generally just bloody work. In fact, I like them. Compatibility on them is usually brilliant, and they'll almost invariably work with older DOS titles without needing a TSR running or anything. Sound Blaster Pro compatibility and all. The sound quality of them isn't even bad, and they have an integrated FM clone that sometimes sounds a little bit different to the Yamaha ones, but sounds nice, or as nice as OPL can sound, which is generally horrible, but certainly if you're into OPL noises, I think it's up there as far as the clones go. It's one of the best ones. There'll be something that won't work on it, I'm sure, but it'll take you a while to find whatever that is, at least I would think so. You might recognise this sound chip as a larger version of the one in my Armada 3500, because laptops also tended to come with a variant of these for a while, which I think probably had some power saving and likely used smaller transistors inside it. For those that care, you can disable the onboard sound with a jumper in the corner there, but as the onboard sound is good, I can't imagine why you'd want to do that. The only thing it lacks is the wavetable header, but seeing as nobody really used those, especially the type of person who would buy a computer like this, I'll let it pass, and it isn't really anything of a concern to me. It's not something I could ever imagine wanting to install in this machine. You know what, that's really about it outside of the onboard peripherals that you'd expect anyway. The onboard video does have a feature connector, so video accelerators and capture cards are entirely possible with it if you wanted to do that, and that's something that I maybe would do. Hey, we've even got infrared and some power management headers. I'm never going to use them, but you have to admit, for a cheaper motherboard in a fairly low-cost OEM box, it's pretty full-featured and it is a standard off-the-shelf part. You really can't be mad at it. I'd rather be stuck with a Granville machine than a Dell or something, that's for certain. Now, the original hard drive died a long time ago, before I even got this PC, so I had to guess, and I used the 6GB Quantum Fireball. Granville liked Seagate drives usually, but I'd expect it to have been around the same size and spec as this one. Desktop IDE on a flimsy drive like this seems pretty laughable on the face of it, but we do now have Ultra DMA mode, and you might just be surprised at what that can do for us, so we'll see more of that later. Should also mention that I do like the way the drive cages in these cases have this sort of hinge out method about them with one screw. That's actually really nice. I wish more cases had done that. It makes doing the cables so much easier. It's just a small thing, but yeah, I always liked that. So lastly, for the hardware then, is the CPU. This chip is not common, though I don't really know why, and we saw it years ago on this channel. Let's take the heatsink off. Oh, jeez. Stop being awkward. Yeah, this is one of those cases where anyone who fiddled about in machines of this era will know sometimes the only solution is double penetration. There you go. This is a Cyrix 6x86-P200, a CPU running on a 75 MHz bus and using a 2-speed multiplier, resulting in a clock speed of 150 MHz. It runs at the full 3.52 volts. It gets hot. It's slightly taller than most socket 5 and 7 chips, and so a lot of heat sinks tend to just cock over to one side when mounted on it. Watch out for that if you have one of these, because they really do need good cooling. You'll notice it's not a small heatsink. I'm not sure how well it will come out in the video, but you may just be able to see that the ceramic on this chip comes to the same height as it does on the Pentium. The gold heat spreader protrudes a little farther, so these are taller than the other chips. They're taller than Pentiums and K5s, and you have to watch out for that when you're putting heat sinks on, because it can pull the heat sink over to one side, so it'll lean, and it's not something I think really went away, because I remember it being an issue on the PR333, like the MX 686 I had. It was actually on another Granville machine. That was on the ECS P5SD, sort of the successor to this board. I do still have it. Not really that interesting, other than it having TV output on board, but maybe we'll see it someday, I don't know. Anyway, always worth noting these things, because I don't really see them written down so much anymore. That top gold heat spreader is noticeably rounder in the corners than the later 686L and 686MX. Oh yeah, this is the original 686, not some fancy later one with reduced power dissipation or MMX instructions. This is just raw power, and it dissipates about 25 watts, if not more, which is quite heavy for a CPU in this era. In fact, this might be the most power-hungry CPU of its time. The L version, which is probably what you'll find if you look for one of these chips, runs at lower voltage and draws only around 18 watts, which is a little bit more normal. The MX is much the same. The original P200 here, without the extra letters and that higher voltage that it likes to use, was thought by some to be the fastest x86 chip for a very brief time when it launched. But it's hard to find exact dates because information on this particular model is quite scarce. I'd be curious to know how it compares to the L version, and in fact that might be a more sensible purchase, but as we know I don't really do entirely sensible. You've got to have a little bit of fun. I like things that are a bit dangerous. Like the Pentium, it is a superscalar, super pipeline CPU, and it should run most of the same things, possibly better, possibly worse, depending on what you're trying to do with it. Architecturally, they're actually quite different. We really should check the performance then, and I'm going to be comparing it with my K5 PR166 just for fun, and so we have a rough idea, because I can't compare it with nothing. That would be a little bit awkward. My K5's a slightly older machine. It uses the SYS 5500 chipset on its ECS SI55P. It's stuck on parity RAM, which might hurt it slightly in the performance department, but it has a discrete video card in the form of a Max64 VT, and also has the same amount of cache as our Cyrix machine. So things should be pretty close, at least in theory. The K5 runs at a lower clock, 116 MHz, versus the Cyrix 150, and it also has the slower FSB at 66 MHz, where we know the Cyrix is at 75. I do have async PCI enabled, so I'm really not going to be getting maximum performance out of that. Some motherboards struggle with this bus speed, and indeed my SI55P doesn't even have it as an option. It also struggles in the voltage regulator department to keep the K5 fed with electricity, as the near 17 watts that draws was quite heavy for the time. Needless to say, this would be even more of a problem with the Cyrix, and I doubt the power setup on that older board could even do it. The P5 STA seems to handle it just fine though, so it's good to see ECS were on the ball, even when so many other board manufacturers weren't. You'd be amazed how many Socket 7 motherboards really struggle to power K5s and 686s. In 3D Bench, the Cyrix is a definitive winner because it gets 105 points against 87.7 for the K5. In PC Player, it's really the same deal, 34.5 against 30.7. It leaves the K5 for dead in Top Bench, 325 versus 240. SpeedSys, well, it falls behind, 100.52 versus 121.42. We do know as a processor, K5s are generally quite fast. Memory is faster on my K5, 156 versus 141 megs a second. So much for the SD RAM here, but we did predict this, and I should also add my K5 is actually running tweaked settings, so its performance will be skewed a little bit higher than it would be on defaults. The Cyrix is on defaults. Video memory is faster on my K5, 16 megs a second versus 11. No contest in level 1 cache. The Cyrix pulls over 500 megabytes a second here to my K5 stretch into the 160s. The Cyrix architecture does seem quite cache dependent, or at least Cyrix appear to have thought so, and it's worth noting that they do have a level 0 cache, something like 256 bytes. I wonder if that's the little squiggle in the start of the line there skewing things, because if it is, it doesn't really seem to be helping anything, but honestly I would expect it not to even appear on the graph. I think it's too small for SpeedSys to really measure it, and it might just skew the line and make it look weird. L2 cache is just over 200 megs a second, hence I think is pipeline burst. The K5 won't give me a reading. The cache is definitely there, as adjusting it or turning it off affects the performance in applications, just SpeedSys doesn't really seem to get along with it. And I've seen this a few times on K5 machines, obviously just these two particular things don't seem to get along. I don't know, but I'm not really going to worry about it. Memory throughput is slightly faster on the Cyrix, 86 versus only 70 megs a second. And here comes a problem I have with the way people often test these things. All the focus goes on to id crappy FPS games. I'm guilty of doing the same thing in the past, so I speak from experience. These are games almost nobody actually plays because they suck and really are only useful as a benchmarking tool, but even that is quite dubious, as we're about to find out. Doom is quite a lot faster on my K5, completing only 1191 ticks versus 1747. Quake, weirdly, is identical, 20.6 frames a second on both machines, and I was told Cyrix chips suck at this game. Yet again, it seems Quake hits some weird invisible arbitrary wall on a general platform, then actually using the machine to its full potential, and produces heavily skewed results that don't make any sense or align with any other application on the planet. And past the point of suspecting they did something on purpose, and pretty much just believe the idea at this stage. Like, I really do have to think that this wasn't just them being silly or not knowing what they were doing. There was some conscious effort somewhere to really bias this game towards particular hardware, because nothing else does this. It's the only thing that seems to do this. Duke 3D then, a game that people actually did buy and play, let's not forget it outsold Quake in the 90s, is pretty interesting. If I stand on the roof, the frame rate settles out to 20 frames a second on my K5. It settles out to only 9 frames a second on the Cyrix. The K5 takes a lot longer to load though, and if we start moving, weird things happen. On the K5, we've got a high-performance SCSI hard drive, which just slightly predates the Ultra-DMA-capable IDE drive in the Cyrix, and you'll notice that where the K5 suffers is the loading of textures. Look when we shoot the fan and the game has to load the broken fan tile, it stalls. The Cyrix doesn't. That Ultra DMA IDE drive, in most practical senses, actually performs better than the big IBM DFHS SCSI 2 whatever it is drive in the K5. Of course, that little fireball technically speaks something that basically is SCSI over IDE, but still, you've got to admit that's really quite impressive how in barely a year, which I think that has to be as much as separates these, the budget hard drive that doesn't really claim to be particularly high performance is actually slapping the high performance hard drive in the face. That's actually really cool. As we go on, it continues to get strange. I really don't know why the Cyrix stalls out in the starting position, because once we move around, it generally does provide the smoother experience, and I will be looking to see which one has the higher frame rate on average. And in fact, I'm going to do something here to figure that out, because I'm going to record a demo of the game, and then I'm going to play it back on both the K5 and the Cyrix, and you'll be seeing this mess on screen now. I'm going to split screen it here. I might squash it down or something, and it's going to look a bit weird, but both games are running with identical settings here. 640 by 480 VESA mode, 11 kHz stereo sound. I maybe should have turned that off as the hardware's different, but I don't remember there being too much of a performance gap between the Crystal and ESS. But in any case, we do see that the Cyrix doesn't really struggle anywhere but that rooftop, and it does seem to be smoother, regardless of whether the frame rate's higher or not. It's curious, don't you think, then, that nearly every test we've run that isn't some id Tech pile of crap shows the Cyrix in the lead. It makes you think, but now I think we're thinking outside of the box, and that tends to upset people. Being outside of the box is scary, because the people who say and think the same things you do are still inside the box, and you're out here now, and that's not good. We'd better go back inside the box before it all goes wrong. Joke's on you, I'm the guy who writes the label and hands it over to the post office. Off you go to Timbuktu. I don't know what I'm talking about sometimes, don't ask me, I'm tired. With all that said, the Cyrix pretty much wins in WinTune 97 too. Of course, we mustn't forget that the Cyrix is a P200 and we're putting it against a PR166. I'd like to show you more under Windows, but with no CD-ROM drive and no network card, I can't easily load things onto the PC. Still, the onboard VGA has MPEG decoding, just barely. I suspect the CPU's still doing a heck of a lot of the heavy lifting here. You can't full screen it, and the sound quality is really quite poor. And adjusting the volume actually just fiddles with the volume for the wave in the sound card's mixer, but it works. I don't hate it. Oh jeez, there's a spatula. No, it's not SRS, who cares? Everything seems to work. I don't know, maybe we'll have to come back to this PC someday. Overall then, we have what would have been a fairly plain old contemporary machine that certainly isn't terrible. Could it be worse? Oh, it could be a lot worse. Could it be better? Well, I'm sure it could. Could it be faster? Oh, it sure could. But then I could buy a Core i3 for about $20 and stop caring about the speed on a computer that's nearly 30 years old. But what fool would do that? Well, call me a fool, because I would, because that just seems like the easier and simpler way of solving the problem. You know, they always did say I was an idiot. When that loon's quite finished with his little rant there, that's the Cyrix 686. Far stronger than I remember it being. I thought it was a weaker machine than that. I'm quite happy with it. You know, and someone's going to be there, well, you didn't get a 3D accelerator, you should put one in, and if you're thinking that, you've totally missed the point of the machine. This machine's perfect. This machine is brilliant, because this machine is meant to be the department store machine. The machine you bought cheap was probably somebody's fast computer. These were abundant where I come from. I've worked on loads of them, various brandings on the front, but they're all basically the same machine, just slightly different hardware. Were quite cheap, they didn't cost a lot of money, and they pretty much just work. You know, they're made with standard parts. no real gripes. And this, for the time it's made, you know, the 3D accelerator thing, your top selling games didn't bloody use them. Like, a lot of them were still on DOS. We know this thing will do DOS. It'll do that until the end of time quite happily, no problem. And that onboard ESS is great for that sort of thing, as far as the audio is concerned. The sys card, yeah, it's not a top performer, but it gets there. It's good enough. Windows stuff was all direct draw, GDI, and Wing, all your top selling games of that era, really. And this thing can do that. Probably play Age of Empires on it. I would test that. If I had the CD drive working, I would totally test it, but I'm just so tired of repairing, so maybe we'll have to see it again. And there's certainly no problem with being curious about how far something will go. Maybe we'll have to put a Matrix card in there or something just once and see how quick we can get the thing to run, fiddle with some settings. Well, to remember my K5, because I had to use it to do jobs that it wasn't really meant for, still has a bunch of tweaked parameters to make it go faster. And this thing I didn't think would beat it as much as it did. So, yeah, I don't know. I think Cyrix maybe were actually on the right path here for a little while. They did. I think their latest CPUs haven't been quite disappointing, but this, no, this is pretty good CPU, I've got to say. And I think with that motherboard as well, it's a good combination. Now, what happened? Why has this taken so long? I'll tell you about that after the logo roll. This video, I know it wasn't amazing. This is one no one's going to remember that much, and that's fine. I needed something like this to get back into the sort of routine. I don't run on a schedule or anything, but the sort of just the workflow of doing this, and it's something I'm so familiar with doing that I'm going to pick it up faster doing this. I still want to go into more general electronics and stuff. I still have a backlog of things. I don't want to just do the same machines over and over unless the video is really bad and rough and needs doing again or something. If anyone has ideas for some, do let me know, but I don't have a lot of time to do this, so it is always just going to be as and when, because I always seem to be busy and nearly everything else I have to do is more important, so that's just how it is. And I think there's, you know, everyone has their life to live. If I was uploading constantly, no one would watch it. So yeah, I guess we'll leave it there. That's the sort of important things. You'll get a big rant after the logo. There's not enough time to fit the whole thing in on this entire site. I wouldn't think on the entire internet. I could probably fill the entire World Wide Web alone with the whole story here. But in the meantime, I'm High Treason. Thanks for watching. And remember, don't be a screw-up. Load DOS 622 up. Or Windows 95, which I guess is DOS 7.1, which is probably about as good. So, where have I been and what the hell's been going on for all one or two of you out there who care? Oh man, it has been one hell of a year, more than a year I think now. My Xeon broke, I had disk failure, and I had disk failure again, and my backups broke, and my offsite backups broke. So my data's gone. You notice we've got a new logo, new overlay graphics, because what I had, those no longer exist. The only old files I have is whatever just happens to be on machines that survived, because more than half of what I own doesn't work now, which is great. I don't know what happened. It was weird. The Presler I spent within the last couple of years 4 figures on hard drives alone. I kept buying them, they kept failing. My whole network would drop. Yeah, the whole network would go down. Some of it is 10 base too, so I didn't really notice with that. All the gigabit stuff that I noticed, just all of it just go out. Every USB device would drop out on every machine at once. I'd hear these weird RFI noises in my headphones. And there's like a line through my stuff where things are just broken, whether it was turned on running or not, it's just dead. Network cards, I've hardly got any left that work. Pretty much all of them are dead. In fact, the new PC I'm on, which is an i5, piece of shit, not the CPU's fault. I'm on an MSI board. MSI's. If I could replace that board, I think it'd be a good machine. But it's the only motherboard I could get. 400 quid motherboard. I'll complain about that in a minute. Yeah, that's broke. My Chipset Technologies 386 doesn't work. Throws errors, so the CPU in that is running. I think it's just the MIO card. I might put it on SCSI, because my DX50 got an upgrade. I traded an SW60 for a 5-inch SCSI hard drive, so that Micropolis is sort of redundant now, and I think I might put it in that C&T 386. That might work. That drive does still function. I'll see if I can get a SCSI card for that PC. Maybe we'll give that a go. We may see these machines as I repair them. Maybe I'll record it as I go, and then I'll just compile it into a video, because a lot of them are changed configuration, and then we just cover it really fast, you know, like a minute per machine or something. The second Pentium 66 is dead, but you never saw that. I was supposed to do a video on that before things went to shit. Well, they were already going to shit when I was still making videos. We were already having a lot of trouble. Big 386, believe it or not, is still running about as badly as it was. That doesn't seem to have gotten much worse. One of the 286s is dead. The Turbo XT is dead. I believe they're all repairable. The U540 broke. I've got it working again. Still need a network card for it. My K5 died, network card went, and the CPU in it got toasted. So the K5 you've seen today is the machine that we know, but it's not running on the same CPU, it's on the SPA. So I now don't have a SPA K5, don't know that I'll bother getting one. And I didn't repair the CD drive or the NIC in the Cyrix there, because all I've done is repair things for over a year, and I've just no more, that's it. Get the new PC built, no more repairs for the rest of the year. So I sort of dedicate myself to building the PC somewhere around October, got it finished. My target was actually end of December. I finished it somewhere in November, actually nearly 2 months ahead of schedule. I got it done. You know, and if I was a real YouTube guy, I would have been begging you to send me money to pay for it. Believe it or not, I'm not terrible with finances, and I don't think I'd really make anything out of YouTube. Not my way. I'd sooner fix the problem myself, and I did. So, you know, now I don't feel like I owe anyone anything, which is always good. The MSI board, though, it sucks. I think MSI is probably what killed Granville, because they switched from ECS to MSI. They went to them 6340 boards, which you know I fucking hate. They used to break after a few months. They sucked. And I bet that's what did Granville in. This thing's some Z790 thing, lies about its specs. 16-lane PCI Express, go fuck yourself, look at the fingers. Yeah, that ain't 16-lane. The BIOS lets you set it as 16-lane, but that's lying to you. The site, the manual, and the BIOS all lie to you. 400 quid capture card I had to throw out because it wouldn't work, because it's a 4-lane card, so I have to run a worse capture card, which is just fantastic. So thanks for that, MSI, because that sort of shit used to be legal, but it's not enforced anymore, is it? These trading standards and consumer rights, good luck with that. BIOS lets you set these 2 SATA ports that don't exist, because the chipset has 8, they only put 6 on, but you can still toggle them in the BIOS, and every now and then the machine will just shut off, black screen, not start up, and you get a message flashes on about BIOS update and failed, press F1, but it doesn't wait for you to press F1, goes right on by. And that can take a while before it'll come back up to that state. I didn't try updating the BIOS, it just does it. The fact it skips it makes me think MSI knew about the problem and didn't know how to fix it. So the board sucks. If I can get another one, then I'll get another one. I wanted a Super Micro. Super Micro boards always work for me. I've got another hard drive, so we're running on a flash card, so I don't have a lot of time before that fills up, and it's fucking slow because SSDs, no matter what people keep telling me, are slow. I have 3 machines that use them now, and they're all bloody slow. They're awful at doing video. Maybe if you play games on them, they're good. I don't know. I don't do that very much. So most of the games I play are old shit that are running on MS-DOS or Windows 98. So what good is this to me? Hard drives, cheaper, and get better performance, and I will get some of them. In fact, I aim to break 100 terabytes on this machine by the time I'm done with it, and I will do it. So, You know, that's going to take me a while because I'm in no rush to do it, but I will do it. Just watch me. Just because I can. Well, I could stand here and rant all day, but you get the idea. Everything's broke, and I ain't repairing it yet, because I'm sick of repairing things. And if this i5 breaks, I'm not going to do this anymore. That will be the final nail. I'm just not... I'm not going through that again. No way. And the way... I'm still on... I can't use Windows 11. It doesn't work on this PC. So I'm having to run Windows 10, so I'm on an operating system that's pretty much out of support on a brand new machine. So... wonderful. You know, the standard of PCs now, it sucks. I'm still on the shitty Cosmos case because I can't get a new chassis. That's a whole other fucking story. I'm still on my GeForce 750 Ti because good luck getting a monitor and actually attaching it to a video card. You know, what was I saying about people whose breath smells like soy and penises? There's a fine example. So my new monitor is going to cost me like 700 quid or something, it looks like, which is just fantastic. It doesn't even come with a stand, so I have to make one. You know, this is the world we live in. Some days I wake up and I just wonder if everybody but me is a retard. Thankfully, I think people around here are probably smarter than the average. You know, so obviously it's not just me, but I don't know. Maybe I'm the stupid one. Entirely possible. Could be. Might be. Doesn't seem that unlikely. But it's not a game I'm willing to play much more. So when this fucks up this time, I will be just calling it a day. And when I could take yours, could break while I'm editing this and you could never see it. I don't know. But I think I should stop ranting before this runs over until the year 2030 or something. And if I get this done on time, or if it is just slightly after, I suppose, the polite thing to do is wish everybody a happy new year. I hope it's a good one. Good or bad, it's shaping up to be bloody interesting. At the very least, I think it's going to be an interesting year. So, yeah. Well, I'm High Treason, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Whenever it is, and whatever it is. I don't know. I've got ideas. It's getting to doing it. It's having the time to set things up and get it done, assuming it even works. So, that's it. I'm out of here. I'll see you around. Oh, you don't press buttons on the camera now, do I? I've got to walk across my room, which luckily my house is a 12-foot square box, so it's 2 steps to get to.